Today we are going to discuss last part of our chapter, which is market for goods. But before we start with this part, I think I should bring a smile on your face. How can I do this? Well, just go on the next slide and hear something. Let's discuss about it after you go and hear an audio on the next slide.
रोशनी की दुनिया का सरताज बाजार
चाय कॉफी के संग भाए कदम मेहमानों को खुश कर जाए मजेदार लज्जतदार स्वाद में लिज्जत पर जब जी चाहे शौक से खाए कदम सेक के खाए तल के खाए मजेदार लज्जतदार स्वाद में लिज्जत पर
हमको पता है जी,
आपको पता है जी,
सबको पता है जी,
सबको पता है जी,
बरसों से चाहत अपनी यही है जी,
अपनी भी सांस भरे शक्ति भरे
बरसों से
पाले जी।
Did you listen to the audio? Did it bring a smile on your face? Are you a little bit confused? What is the purpose of making you listen to this audio? Well, you guessed it right. These are old advertisements which would be aired on television during 1980s. These are old advertisements. These days you can see advertisements everywhere around you. Wherever you are, in whichever part of the world you stay, or even in the rural area, you will see advertisements, correct? You will find that advertising is done in variety of ways. Can be in newspaper, on radio, on television, or even on a billboard along the side of the road. Virtually, it is unavoidable by any of the consumer. Now, when you were listening to the audio of this advertisement, it was actually informing you about the product, it was persuading you to buy the product, and it was also reminding you about this product, correct? It is an informative advertising. It's informing you, it's creating awareness of brands, products, services, and ideas. It announces new products and programs, and it can also educate people about the attributes and benefits of new or established product. That is what this advertising tries to do. Okay, let's take an example of a current day. If I say Lay's has introduced a new flavor, Lay's, the company which prepares chips, wafers, so it has introduced new flavor. It has been advertised on the television set n number of times, so it has actually persuaded you. You have the information about the product, and so when you land up in a supermarket to buy a product, and if you actually see this product in the shelf, you are bound to buy it, correct? So such type of various forms of advertising have been around from thousands of years. Now you were able to hear an audio, but in olden days, Egyptians used papyrus leaf to advertise goods and services. Okay, now let us stop our discussion about the commercial, about the advertisement, and let us find out what our chapter is trying to tell us. Is it trying to tell us the same thing? Let's go on the next slide and continue with our chapter, and let's find out the answer. We have seen how British manufacturers attempted to take over the Indian market, and how Indian weavers and craftsmen, traders and industrialists resisted colonial control, demanded tariff protection, created their own space, and tried to extend the market for their produce. But when new products are produced, people have to be persuaded to buy them, correct? They have to feel like using the product. So how was this done during those days? It was done through advertisement. Let's find out how were these new products advertised and new customers created. Advertisement. It is a means of communication with the user of a product or a service. Advertisements are messages paid for by those who send them and are intended to inform or influence people who receive them. Advertising is always present, though people may not be aware about it. In today's world, advertising uses every possible media to get its message through. It does this via television, print, that is newspaper, magazines and journals, radio, press, internet, direct selling, hoarding, mails, contests, sponsorships, posters, cloths, events, colors, sounds, visuals and even people. During the early 19th century, advertising was already well established in Britain, highly visible on its street and its press. While not all manufacturers and merchants were convinced of the value of advertising, deeming it unrespectable, but more and more were choosing to advertise during this period. Moreover, these years saw the introduction of increasing number of nationally distributed branded products, particularly non-perishable domestic goods such as shoe polish and hair oil, which were advertised in nationwide marketing campaigns. Advertisers made use of a number of different media. Posters were extremely popular, allowing great creative scope and providing a means for rapidly disseminating information. Indeed, some people complain that practically they are covering all of the newspaper wherever they find a space. Nevertheless, despite these drawbacks, newspaper were an important advertising medium during the early 19th century. Advertising occupied a large amount of space in newspaper during this period, often consisting of up to 50% of most of its paper. Frequently appearing were advertisements for books, auctions, retailers, property, medicine, lotteries, employment, particularly for servants, theatre, horses and carriage, and coaching services. Advertising was an important source of finance for papers as sales alone were often inadequate to cover production cost. Let's move on to the next slide. In comparing newspapers published in Britain at the beginning of the 19th century with those published 100 years later, one is immediately struck by a number of prominent visual differences. One of the foremost being the style and the type of advertising. While at the start of the century, advertisements were almost wholly textual and were packed together in an undifferentiated manner with the column rules. By the end of the century, the pages of many newspapers were with large illustrated advertisements promoting different kind of products and services. Indeed, the 19th century witnessed a number of important developments in advertising in Britain. So now, what do we conclude from the above discussion? That advertisement makes product appear desirable and necessary. It shapes a new consumer culture. It shapes the minds of the people and create new needs. It plays a part in expanding the market for products. Advertisement appear in television screens, that is on television screens, street walls, newspaper, magazines and hoardings. Let's take one example of India's best loved beverage, tea. On this slide, there is an advertisement for Lipton tea and the Brook Bond tea, correct? Now, let's speak about the Lipton tea. It features an illustration of an Indian woman dressed in jewels. Alongside, there is a trademark slogan promising a cup of tea direct from the tea gardens to the teapot. From this particular image, it so appears that the Indian woman appears to enjoy apparent wealth as a plantation worker. It contributed to an image of Lipton's as a moral business. But in reality, typical working conditions were poor, involving long hours and isolation from the local communities. Workers were very often employed on a contract basis, which meant that if they left the employment, they would be pursued and then punished. Now let us bring our attention to the second advertisement, and that is about the Brook Bond tea. Let's listen to the story about the tea and how it became popular in our country. India owes its taste for tea and coffee to the diligent care of its former colonial overlords. Tea, particularly the Darjeeling kind, was introduced in the plantations in the northeast India in 1830s. As the British wanted to remove the monopoly of the Chinese government over production of tea. Tea plantations in India were initially meant to produce tea for foreign consumers. When tea consumption in Britain and in the US began to stagnate around the turn of the 20th century, British, ever the opportunist, decided to look to India to expand their markets. The only problem was that Indians were extremely reluctant consumers of the combination of sugar, boiled leaves, water and milk. In 1903, British government established a propaganda unit at first called the Tea Cess Committee that was meant to propagate tea consumption. This board was funded by the proceeds of a tax on the export of tea. The government neatly renamed this as the Indian Tea Market Expansion Board in 1937. Tea was so foreign to Indians and for that matter Europeans that the tea board's earlier ad had to include instructions on how to brew the product. The boards also distributed small packets of tea available for 1 paisa in villages and to middle class consumers. The tea shops that exist at railway stations and docks today are a product of the tea board's campaign. So, tea might seem to be India's best loved beverage, but its popularity is actually the result of the careful propaganda efforts. It means it is an example of a good advertisement which was done for the market for goods. And that example is tea. Go on to the next slide and just view the pictures to see how Indian government popularized this brew, this tea, after the independence. Now, coming back to the chapter, when Manchester industrialists began selling cloth in India, they put labels on the cloth bundles. The label was needed to make the place of manufacture and the name of the company familiar to the buyer. The label was also to be mark of quality. When buyers saw "Made in Manchester" written in bold on the label, they were expected to feel confident about buying cloth. But the labels did not only carry words and text, they also carried images and were very often beautifully illustrated. If we look at these old labels, we can have some idea of the mind of the manufacturer, their calculations, and the way they appeal to the people. Images of Indian gods and goddesses regularly appeared on these labels. It was as if the association with God gave divine approval to the goods being sold. The imprinted image of Krishna or Saraswati was also intended to make the manufacture from foreign land appear somewhat familiar to Indian people. By the late 19th century, manufacturers were printing calendars to popularize their products. Unlike newspapers and magazines, calendars were used even by people who could not read. They were hung in tea shops and in poor people's homes just as much as in offices and middle-class apartments. And those who hung the calendars had to see the advertisements day after day through the year. In these calendars, once again, we see the figures of gods being used to sell new products. Like the images of gods, figures of important personages, that is VIP, celebrities, of emperors and nawabs adorned an advertisement and calendars. The message very often seemed to say, if you respect the royal figure, then respect this product. When the product was being used by king or produced under royal command, its quality could not be questioned. Here we come to the end of our chapter. Let's see, what did I gain from this chapter? How am I going to utilize my knowledge of industrialization and apply it in the present day scenario? Let's find out. Industrialization is the period of social and economic change that transforms a human group from an agrarian society into an industrial society. This involves an extensive reorganization of an economy for the purpose of manufacturing. That is what we saw in the age of industrialization in Britain and in India. As the Industrial Revolution was a shift from an agrarian society, people migrated from villages in search of jobs to places where factories were established. This shift of rural people led to urbanization and increase in the population of towns. The concentration of labor in factories has increased urbanization and the size of settlements to serve and house the factory workers. Industrialization has its share of advantage and disadvantage. Industrialization generates employment opportunity, provides educational opportunities, encourages advancement and innovation, and better utilizes resources. All of these benefits and more make industrial development extremely valuable to the population and the local economy. It tends to raise the standard of living for most of the people in a society. Machines can be used to do the most dangerous and physically demanding types of jobs or work, which saves lives and injuries. Industrialized nations tend to have a better healthcare system, and there is more money to build infrastructure such as roads, power distribution networks, schools, and communication systems. Let's see the disadvantages of industrialization. Industrialization introduced new problems. Its environmental drawbacks include the pollution of air, water, and soil that can result in significant deterioration of quality of life and life expectancy. Because of industrialization, there is a significant separation of labor and capital. Those who own the means of production become disproportionately rich, resulting in high income inequality. The migration of the workers, the separation of the family members, long working hours, and overcrowding that results from industrialization can lead to social tension and diseases due to poor nutrition and stress. It creates pollution, fragmentation of natural habitat, and general environmental degradation. Please go on the next two slides and see the elaborated points of the disadvantages of industrialization. Do think and tell me about the question which is asked on the next slide. Children, please do read the chapter as I have mentioned it before. Do find out 1 mark, 3 mark, and 5 mark questions on each and every paragraph and try and write down at least 3 questions per day. On the last slide, there is an information about a video. It's a short, traditional, animated educational film released by the Film Division of India, Government of India in 1974. It was aired on Doordarshan and it became very popular among children. It was called Ek Anek or Ekta. This film was intended to teach the value of unity and teamwork to children, unity in diversity. It contains the message of how India is stronger if its citizens stand united regardless of cultural differences. This film won the National Film Award for Best Educational Film, and it was the first film from the animation studio of then Center for Education Technology. The film also won the Best Children's Film Award in Japan. This is considered to be one of India's greatest example of animation storytelling and well remembered by the 80s generation as a classic illustration of Anekta Mein Ekta. Well, you might ask why I'm asking you to actually view this animation film. Well, animation, while often thought of as more or less modern medium, has been used in different forms since 1906. Throughout the last century, we have used it to entertain as propaganda and to tell stories that evoke emotions. The earliest known animated film was made in France in 1906, titled Humorous Face of Funny Faces, and was made from chalk pictures. Since then, other small animations were made. but the first animated cartoon with synchronized was made by Walt Disney in 1928 called Steamboat Willie. Animation is an art which plays a very vital role in the business world as well as touches the lives of many general masses. In this world of digital marketing, a lot of animation is used on the internet for promotion among the targeted audience. We come across animation on other mediums such as print media and television, as it is one of the most versatile and flexible means. The need for animation arises as a form of an excellent means of interaction that helps to communicate the concept of any kind to large number of audience, whether young or old. As we had been talking about advertisement in this particular part, I thought that you should be introduced to animation too. So do go and watch the video, a short film, which is actually very small and is very informative.
हिंद देश हम सभी एक है तररररर। भाषा अनेक है भाषा अनेक है। ये अनेक क्या है दीदी? अनेक यानी बहुत सारे। बहुत सारे? क्या बहुत सारे? अच्छा बताती हूँ। सूरज एक, चंदा एक, तारे अनेक। तारों को अनेक भी कहते हैं? नहीं नहीं, देखो फिर से। सूरज एक, चंदा एक, एक 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 करके तारे भये अनेक। ठीक से समझाओ ना दीदी। देखो देखो एक गिलहरी, पीछे पीछे अनेक गिलहरियाँ। एक तितली, एक और तितली, एक 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 करके हो गई अब अनेक तितलियाँ। समझ गया दीदी? एक उंगली अनेक उंगलियाँ। हाँ दीदी दीदी, वो देखो अनेक चिड़िया। अनेक चिड़ियों की कहानी सुनोगे? हाँ हाँ। एक चिड़िया, एक एक करके अनेक चिड़िया। दाना चुगने आई चिड़िया। हमें भी सुनाओ ना। तो सुनो फिर से। एक चिड़िया, अनेक चिड़िया, दाना चुगने बैठ गई थी। हाय राम, पर वहाँ व्याध ने एक जाल बिछाया था। व्याध? व्याध कौन दीदी? व्याध चिड़िया पकड़ने वाला। फिर क्या हुआ दीदी? व्याध ने उन्हें पकड़ लिया, मार डाला। हिम्मत से अगर जुट रहे तो, छोटे हो पर मिले रहे तो, बड़ा काम भी होवे भैया, बड़ा काम चतुर चिड़िया, सयानी चिड़िया, मिलजुल कर जाल लेकर भागी चिड़िया। दूर एक गांव के पास चिड़ियों के दोस्त चूहे रहते थे और उन्होंने चिड़ियों का जाल काट दिया। तो देखा फिर तुमने, अनेक फिर एक हो जाते हैं तो कैसा मजा आता है। दीदी मैं बताऊं? हो गए एक, बन गई ताकत, बन गई हिम्मत। दीदी अगर हम एक हो जाए तो बड़ा काम कर सकते हैं। हाँ हाँ क्यों नहीं, तो इस पेड़ की आम भी तोड़ सकते हैं। हाँ तोड़ सकते हैं, पर जुगत लगानी होगी।